Hello, friend.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We don't have the best camera work here. We've got a nice little space, but you're pretty much communicating off of my laptop. Seems to be working.
Okay.
But you can have big voice. Oh yeah, and you're on the big screen too.
Oh, okay, good.
So we start off with just a couple of minutes of housekeeping. Please go to Canvas. And actually, I want to share my screen. The code is 939. I didn't even have time. I had a department deadline right before class, so I didn't have time to even come up with PowerPoint slides. I beg your indulgence. Code is 939. 939er. If you were a pilot, you might see that. And then it's simply open response, point for anything. Describe something you are doing or did this week to take care of yourself. And it'll stay open for 60 minutes. Who's messaging me? Somebody's messaging me. Oh, there. Oh.
It was me. I'm going to share some information from that. So I just wanted to give it to you in case you could pass it on to the students.
Indeed. Actually, I'm going to turn on screen sharing. I forgot to do that. Now I can do that, but I can still call things up if you like. Right. Actually. So. Do you want me to call this link up? Tara? I just knocked off my microphone. You want me to call the link up?
Sorry, I was muted. No, it's okay. I can, I will share it on my own screen as long as I have screen sharing abilities.
You should be good to go. All right. And I don't think we need this stuff anymore. All right, so speaker view. I'd like to introduce you to Tara PIXLEY. Tara is my primary favorite research partner. Tara and I met a couple years ago. We were introduced by Ariel Zimlich, actually. We have a lot of shared interest in the stuff that we research. And we're a busy couple of people, I think, with all of our projects. Our current research pipeline looks like a snake that swallowed an elk. So, Tara's going to talk to you about your assigned reading, which was the State of Photography Report 2021. Well, Tara and I will talk to you about that because we both pretty much ate our last year and a half, didn't it?
Yes, indeed. Still eating it.
No kidding. So yeah, group work. Oh, enough said. So,
group work across 2 continents.
Yeah. So Tara, if you wanted to kind of, since you have the screen, let's talk about what this, I mean, everybody here was assigned to read this, so they basically know what this is, but if you can kind of give an overview, as if you were explaining it to somebody at a family reunion or something.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you all for being here. So just a little bit of background. I don't know how much you know about the state of photography reports, but it has its start in 2014 when World Press Photo started surveying their respondents, and then World Press Photo working with oh gosh, I think it was Reuters Institute at Oxford, put out their first State of News Photography report in 2015. And we found out some really interesting things from that report. So it revealed statistics like there's only 15% of photojournalists who are women who are entering the competition, and that the majority of the contest entrants were men, white men from Europe and North America. And then they repeated this survey and the subsequent report in 2016 and 2018. I'm going to share my screen now to show you. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and so here I'm showing you, also this is the link that I shared in the chat. This is where World Press Photo holds these three reports from 2015, 2016, 2018. They moved away from doing that, and you can see here they started doing technical reports. But this is the very last State of News Photography report that they put out in 2018. It's very nice looking. I highly recommend you all check it out. And this report differs from the thing that we're going to talk about, which is the State of Photo study for 2022. And that report, that forthcoming report that you all got to see a preliminary version of it. This work that World Press Photo did was based specifically off of the photographers who were submitting work to that World Press Photo award. So it's representative of those contest entrants, not necessarily representative of all the photographers working in the world. And I don't know, Martin, how much you've spoken about the way that surveys kind of work and how they're structured and the sort of limitations of surveys. But one thing I think it's really important to understand is that surveys really just represent the population that is surveyed, right? So we had some limitations in this survey. I wanted to see a survey that was working outside of a contest so it could understand the experience of people who don't or can't enter photo awards. And I thought it would be important for us to look more closely at people of color and people working in and local to nations of the global South. So I proposed a big survey project to catch light, and I asked your professor, the wonderful Martin Smith-Rodden, if we could work together on it. And we also brought on David Campbell and Adrian Hadland, who are two photography scholars and educators working in the UK, and they had worked on those first few State of Photo studies with World Press. And we pushed, so I pulled this up here just to give you a sense of the kind of history and foundation that we're building off of. And again, I highly recommend you all check this out. But these surveys primarily looked at employment patterns and work practices, as you can see here, what kind of education people had, and technology and platforms. How are people using social media? How do people feel about their security in the industry? Is there job security? Is there financial security? And so we wanted to do something a little bit different and start thinking about diversity, inclusion, equity, but also precarity. How are people experiencing potential spaces of precarity? And what I mean by that is, do people have access to the resources that they need to do their job well? And that can mean a lot of different things. And we'll unpack various forms of precarity across our little chat today. But first, I wanted to give you a quick overview. So I'm showing the back end here, which is the report that came out of the survey, which we ended up reaching 1,325 international photographers. So people from all over the world, although the majority of those who responded were still working primarily in North America. But you can see here, it's a 243-page report. So it's a lot of data, a lot of information to analyze, but it's really awesome because we got to see a lot of different groups and kinds of people. So 16% of the people who responded to the survey identified as photojournalists, but there were also commercial photographers, photo editors, photo consultants, curators, photo educators, a lot of different kinds of folks represented here. And the average age of our respondents were 43 years old, but the largest group of by by generation were millennials at 36%. So the majority of folks, or the biggest group that we were able to sort of assess in this, were millennials. And a very big difference between the first State of News photo studies and this one is that 49.46% of the respondents were women. So I want to pause here and ask you all, what do you think that says, that specific gender demographic statistic? What do you think that says about the difference between this survey, this project that Martin and I are working on, and the surveys that came before that the World Press Photo put out, where they showed that only 15% of respondents were women? So what do you think is maybe the difference?
I could see the wheels turning.
And there's no right or wrong answer. I just want you all to think about, I mentioned that surveys are representative of who is surveyed, right? How they access that survey. So World Press Photo, that survey was going through the contest. And this survey was open to any photographers anywhere in the world.
No, the other one, all right, so the first surveys were kind of driven by whoever entered, World Press competition. This was a different sampling method that was technically is called a snowball sampling method, where we push it out to maybe the first part of it's what you call purposeful sampling. You push it out to a group of folks, and then they also send out links to their posse, to their friends and contacts and network. So
right. So you're utilizing the different networks. We're posting to social media. We're reaching out to people that we know, individuals and organizations. We're asking them to publicize it. So it snowballs from there, reaching hopefully a very wide-ranging network of folks.
For lack of academic terms, just ask more.
Yes, yes, more inclusive. Yeah. And a dramatically different demographic resulted.
Yeah. So we went from 15% women to 49% women. And, I don't think that I'm really bad at math, so I'm going to probably butcher this, but I think that's almost a, 25% or 35% uptick in, or representation of women. I don't think we added 35% more women photographers in the last few years. So what's probably happening there is that we're seeing very few women enter the World Press Photo Contest. And that's what's happening there. And that's something we don't necessarily have the answer to. And interestingly, we have statistics in our survey that kind of conflict with a little bit of, or conflict a little with that kind of data point, or that analysis that we could get from the 15% gender statistic from the survey the World Press Photo did. But our survey, one of the networks that we reached was Women Photograph. And we had a ton of respondents from Women Photograph. We also reached Black women photographers and Authority Collective. And so all three of those spaces are predominantly women and non-binary photographers. So we actually, through that snowball method, we reached a very different demographic than World Press Photo did. But that also enables us to look specifically at those groups of people who identify as women, people who identify as non-binary, people who identify as women of color. And those were groups that hadn't been really surveyed, that we hadn't had the opportunity previously to understand a lot about their experiences. So that's been a really big difference between these two. And I wanted to do a couple quick hits of key data points, and I'll stop sharing. Sadly, we don't have really nice charts and things to show you yet. We're still working on that, and hopefully we'll have those soon. We're working with PIXLEY to produce all of that kind of data visualization to put these statistics into a sort of clear, illustrated, and graphically interesting, kind of visual space. But for right now, I'll just share some of the ideas that we saw circulating or that we learned through our analysis of the survey. And I don't know if you all know this, but your professor is a superhuman genius individual who is, brilliant at stats. And he was able to do this really cool thing where he's looking at one piece of data, like that gender stat, right? That 49 point, whatever it is, 49.6 there, 49.46, there we go, percent of the respondents were women. So we can take that pool of respondents and then we can look at another data point. We can do a cross tabulation where we say, well, of these people who identified as women, how many of them make less than $50,000 a year? And so then we can look at how much money do the people who identified as women typically make in photography. So some of the things that we found out from doing that kind of cross-referencing and cross-tabulation is that there's a lot of financial precarity in our industry, in the photo industry. Photographers in general don't typically get paid very well. We found that on average, photographers are making around $40,000 to $49,000 USD a year. Now, keep in mind that that's someone who's responding from New York City, someone who's responding from Peru, someone who's responding from Nigeria. So there's people all over the world who are saying what they're making in those areas, and making $50,000 in like Bangkok is going to be different than making $50,000 in Denver or in Miami, right? So there's a lot of layers there that we couldn't quite totally unpack in this survey. We would need subsequent surveys and to ask more pointed questions specifically about how people are making their money. But in general, we saw that that's not a lot of money depending on where you live. And we also found that the majority of photographers who responded to this overwhelmingly work in New York City and Los Angeles. So that's people from all over the world who come to those cities and who typically work from there or are based out of there, even if they travel for photo work. And making $40,000 in LA is not a lot of money. I'm in LA right now, and I can tell you that that's not going to be great. And then we also found that just under 30% of those surveyed earned even less. They earned around $20,000 USD per year from photographic work. And some people reported making upwards of 100K, but that was pretty uncommon. So in addition to photographers just generally not making a ton of money, we also found that there's a lot of pay inequity. So women and photographers of color are actually making less than male photographers and those who identify as not a person of color. And that was about $20,000 on average of a difference between marginalized photographers and white male photographers. So that's a pretty big deal. And we're not sure exactly what's responsible for that pay inequity, but knowing that that's happening allows us to kind of, dig in deeper and try and figure out what's going on in the industry that there's that level of pay inequity between these particular groups. So financial precarity is something we saw a lot of. Also, people having limited access to health insurance was a big one, especially in the United States, where health insurance is not, kind of a federally available program. In other places like Canada and the UK, where everyone has a social support system, people had access to healthcare and it wasn't a big issue. So even freelancers were able to have access to healthcare, whereas in the US, not so much. And then we also noticed some things about pay transparency. Through this survey, we learned that younger photographers, especially millennials, tended to be more willing to share information openly about their finances and other resources at their disposal. So that's kind of interesting. And I want to pause here again to ask you all, why do you think that is? Why do you think that there was a generational difference in how willing people were to talk openly about how much money they make? And even further, what do you think that means? Like, what does that make possible when people are really transparent about how much money they're making?
So and also to frame this, remember, this was an anonymous survey. It is literally impossible, unless they type in their name into an open response, for us to know who is responding to this. So they theoretically should know that, this is an anonymous survey, every respondent, and still there was a
reticence, a clear reticence.
generational difference between millennials and everybody else who were older. So yes, go ahead.
One of the reasons would be the like stigma behind talking about like what you make. And I know my grandma says a lot, like you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. So you just kind of like you're paid what you pay, and now we're like, hey, there are obvious gaps in like pay between people. So now it's more widely talked about and more acceptable to talk about in order to like do the like in order to make change, you have to know what the current status is and everything. That's also a little bit of like supply and demand as well. Like if people don't know that they're getting paid lower than what everybody else is, and they won't demand more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I saw another hand too. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it's very intentional that there is that stigma on older people too, because just what Victoria was saying, it's again, it's intentional. People don't want us as the employees to know that we're being paid different rates. In 2020, there was a whole scandal that broke out at Bon Appetit magazine, and they found that all of the test kitchen chefs of color were making significantly less money than the white chefs, and that's something that happened for years and nobody knew about it. But the second that people started talking about it, it changed, and several people were fired and whatnot. So I think that sometimes there's this like corporate allegiance in older people that they I think older generations are a lot more I don't even know how to say it. It's a lot more obedient and a lot more grateful. They see the jobs that they're working as being given to them, not as they worked for it and they earned it. And I think that's something that's changing in people my age and even millennials too, is you didn't, you don't, not even sure how to get my thoughts across, but.
No, you're
You're right on track.
spot on.
Yeah, thanks both of you for your thoughts on that. And I think you're absolutely right. I also think that it has a lot to do with transparency, right? Once people know that there are other ways of living or being, then when they start to hear stories beyond their own experience, then they have a comparative. And one of the benefits of the world that we live in is we're so networked, via social media and digital media, that we have the opportunity to get all kinds of new information and to constantly compare our experiences to other people's experiences that they're sharing. And before, people didn't, because of those stigmas, because of maybe gratefulness and corporate allegiance, like you're speaking to, they didn't talk about these things, but they trusted the system. They believed that the system was doing right by them. And when you start to communicate and openly, right, and be more transparent about the experiences you're having, and you make a space where other people can do that as well, then you start to see the system actually doesn't work as well as we want it to, or we would hope. And that level of transparency is really important in order to affect change. So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
The people, when it comes to the status quo, the people that are most protected of the status quo are the stakeholders, the primary stakeholders and beneficiaries of the status quo. In this case, you're able to see the effect in the generations, the people who have worked within the status quo and who it's benefited. So, and we see this effect all the time, certainly with intersectionality, but also, organizational psychology. I mean, it's something that happens. It's almost, it's not even a theory. It's almost like a law, It's a very powerful effect.
Yeah. And it's a cultural thing, right? So, our relationships to culture and traditions change over time. And so we're seeing that generational shift. And I hope that through, talking about the financial precarity that people are experiencing and having this data to show people might actually impact their ability to speak more towards pay transparency, to ask for pay transparency, and to say, well, hold on, am I getting the same freelance rate as, this guy or that person? And so, hopefully we will actually experience better pay transparency now that we have this data. Another thing that we noticed in general is that there's a lack of diversity in photography, and that was clear across all of these studies that have been done. It's been a really consistent theme that we've seen that there are fewer people of color, there's fewer people who identify as LGBTQ plus or non-binary or queer, there's fewer women, and there's less support and less resources for people in those marginalized positions or marginalized identities rather. So just thinking about what are the things that are happening in photography that make that create those spaces of inequity, that make it less inclusive and that make it actually exclusionary for certain groups. And one of the things that we also noticed along those lines, because we were looking for a lot of effects along gendered or racialized lines, and also along differences between the global north and global south, folks who are working in those spaces. And one of the things we notice is that men are more likely to win awards, and women are slightly more likely to receive grants and far more likely to be invited to exhibit work at festivals. But men reported they are consistently recognized in multiple ways, male photographers, and also in types of recognition. So I'd said earlier that we actually had a data point that kind of conflicted with the fact that World Press Photo was showing that only 15% of their applicants were, or you know, folks who submitted to the contest were women. But our survey showed the photographers who we surveyed and who responded, it showed that women tended to apply towards awards more. So women are submitting to awards more, or you know, they're self-reporting that they're submitting to awards more than the male photographers in our survey self-reported. But the men self-reported that they were more likely to win awards, if that kind of makes sense. And maybe you can finesse that if it's a little confusing, Martin. But I think the reason why this matters is that so when it comes to being recognized in one particular way, so getting a really big award or really big grant, men did better. And like those tended to be awards where the male photographers did better. And something else we noticed is that people of color, photographers of color, were less likely to submit to awards and grants if they charged an entry fee. So if an award or a grant charged an entry fee, the photographers who identified as white or male, they tended to submit to those awards and grants a little bit less. But if there was an entry fee charge, people who identified as photographers of color would be a 30% drop off, right? So it was like 28% would say, okay, no, there's a submission fee, I'm not going to submit. So that means that the submission fees are actually prohibitive for having diversity in those spaces. And the reason why I think that this information about photo awards is important is, and I'm going to throw out another question for you all for discussion, is what types of success do you think are important to have in the photo industry? Like, how do you become successful in the photo industry? What do you need to do to get recognized and get work? Again, there's no right or wrong answers, just a discussion.
And I'll tell you that we wrestle with this question a lot. And actually anybody doing measurements and studies of work, it's a big deal to operationalize and understand what constitutes success. And it's, you know, it's more than just pay usually. But what do y'all think? Imagine yourself as a photographer 10 years from now and you're successful. What would you look like? What would your life look like, right? Yes.
I would be affording my rent.
Okay.
I don't know if that's going to be a certain or not.
We call that financial stability.
There you go.
I believe and I hope that you will get that before 10 years from now. It's possible, it's coming.
Once they put it, maybe I'll own a house. I don't know about that one though.
Home ownership.
That's
Okay.
too big, Richard.
All right, we need to get y'all to dream bigger. We need to have big goals.
What's success? What is success?
Well, let me ask you this question. How do you think that photographers get attention in order to get more assignments? You know, how do you become a photographer that photo editors and curators are looking for to give you commissions and assignments?
Go ahead.
I think the main thing is that you're just passionate about your work, because that shows through your work whether you love it or not. And when you're passionate about your work, then people want to work with you because they're drawn to that passion.
Could you hear okay?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. But they have to see the work first, right? So how do they see the work to recognize your passion?
Okay. I guess for me, the first thing that popped into my head was like competitions. So I know like we did like INPA and like CPOY, and even just like POY, but also like the guy that came in here and talked to us a few weeks ago about like freelancing your work, like just show up to places where things are happening. And then if you show up to like a rally or a protest, take those pictures and then see if anybody wants them. And once they start knowing that you're like around and that you're always somewhere to take pictures, that gets your name like more places.
It's Todd Bigelow.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely true. Like you're doing that kind of hustling and networking and getting your work in front of people. And the more people see your work and they like it, the more they are likely to, commission that work.
I was gonna say, I think so much of this job is networking and who you know. Because even if you do start to freelance your things and go to a protest or when that Walmart warehouse fire happened in Indy, like you have to know who to send your photos to or who would even want them. Because without knowing that, it's not any use then.
Yeah, so you're building recognition like kind of both ways, right? You have to know who you need to be reaching out to, and then you want to get on their radar so that they're reaching out to you, and you're creating this kind of cyclical professional relationship. I would also add to that you get plenty of name recognition and sort of, like work recognition if you are receiving grants and winning awards and getting yourself out there in a way that photo editors and curators and art directors are seeing your work and your name. And so, those things are kind of, it's a positive feedback loop. So you win an award, people see your name, they hire you, you get better access to, better assignments where the work is really, the assignments, the stories are really good and compelling. And so then you win more awards because you have access to even better stories. And then people say, well, look, they won all of these awards, so they're really good, we're going to keep hiring them. And so it becomes this, kind of, again, a positive professional feedback loop. And if you don't have access to the people who are looking at your work, then you don't get the best assignments and you don't necessarily find those networking opportunities. So then that becomes a negative professional feedback loop, right? Where you're kind of excluded or struggling to get into, to get recognized, like to get your work in a platform that people and on a level that people can see and access and recognize. So thinking about how people have access to or might be disconnected from, or maybe photo awards are inaccessible, I think that's really important to recognize what are the flows and hierarchies of power in the photo industry. And then my last key idea that we pulled from the report, from the study, is that photographers are really building community right now, that there's this need to support one another in the industry. COVID decimated a lot of people's financial stability, and there were people who were already in a financially precarious position that COVID just made worse. And then, even before COVID, there was the recession that kind of, eliminated a lot of different staff photography positions. So there's a huge pool of freelancers now. There's not as much maybe freelance work as there are freelancers. So there's all these things happening that creating community, building that community together, supporting one another, sharing resources, sharing information, like again, returning to pay transparency, making it possible for people to understand how you make it in the industry and then to support each other as they do that. We're seeing that is becoming a really important part of photography, and then people feel like they need that. And that's especially happening in those spaces where people are coming from marginalized identities, like women and non-binary photographers, photographers of color, photographers working in the global South and trying to get their work, recognized and validated and respected equally to their colleagues working the global North. So community building around these spaces to support each other has been really important. And we also found that despite the various difficulties, right, the like financial despair or financial precarity and pay inequity and all these other things, a lack of diversity, et cetera, these like, limitations to accessing photo awards, despite those things, there was general consensus that photographers still feel pretty happy about working as photographers. So that's pretty cool. That means that this profession still resonates with people, that like the goals and aims of the profession and the work practices make people feel happy and make people excited to do the work. So just because there are issues with it doesn't mean that we should scrap the whole thing. It just means that those are issues that we can attend to, pay attention to, and kind of think through solutions and ways to address that together as a community that we're building. So that's my hot take on our like key topic areas, and I'd love to hear any questions that you all have about the report in general.
I'll also share that last statistic kind of blew me away. The effect of people are really feeling largely affirmed, and we did measure. We were measuring were people at risk of leaving the profession. They were survey items, and we saw some effects. I think in terms of maybe correlations between I guess feelings of support and mental health, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, people are sticking with it, and it's a hell of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
is there anything that stood out to you all when you were reading the report?
Yeah.
I just kind of have like a general question, because I know, especially with the gender difference compared to other studies, would you ever consider kind of doing like an offshoot study about the differences in the way women and men experience a career in like photographic storytelling?
Yeah, I would love to do that. I think that there are a lot of there's a lot more to kind of parse out from this survey that we weren't necessarily able to do. And I think we ended up with like 57 questions or something like that when we were trying to keep it much smaller. And there's a huge drop off. We had 1,325 respondents overall, but not all of those people did not respond to every question. And so it would be the most useful to ask simple, small survey, or like to have simple, small surveys that's looking specifically at, kind of what access to these resources do you have? What experiences are you specifically having as a woman of color, as a person with a disability who's a photographer? The thing about that, unfortunately, is that people don't like to take surveys, which I find very confusing because I love taking surveys. I'm that person that I always take the survey. They're like, here's a survey on the receipt. I'm like, oh, sure. Let me tell you, Bloomingdale's, about my experience. But people tend to not take surveys. What is the average response rate? It's like 25%. You're really doing awesome if you get 32% of people to respond to your survey.
Really depends on how you're pushing out the link. Because you can set up Qualtrics if you have the emails of those who you are cajoling into responding to your surveys. You can actually start sending nagging emails over and over again, and I love that. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the method of sampling, actually. Yeah, and actually, I will just tell you, this data set. I mean, we could probably take the current data set that we have. I mean, we had to produce this, and it sounds like we had a lot of time to produce this report, but also, both Tara and I, we have other things that we have to do, like teach. So we had, we kind of did a 10,000 foot up, I think, in most cases, a look at the survey data. But we can go into each. We can kind of explore by gender effects. We can do kind of a deep dive and to see how do men and women and non-binary see the work? How do they respond? We're actually doing something like that between photo editors and photographers. I just talked to Tara just days ago about maybe a spin-off report, not a report, but an article, a journal article that kind of sees, all right, well, where are the tension points between your photo editors and your photographers? Because if you're a photo editor, you hear a lot about, and Tara also is a photo editor, and I think would concur. There's a lot of conflict between photographers and photo editors. Tara and I both experienced it as photographers and photo editors. I think there's conflict. In the end of the day, it's just a difference of opinion or a different sort of perspective. How you see, when you're doing problem solving. We talked about it a lot in 332. So we have this data set now where we have, all these photographers and a fair amount of photo editors responding to the same questions about ethics. How do people view consent? Do they think racism is a thing? Do they think ageism is a thing? And sexism and sexual harassment? We can actually parse apart those, at least the samples from those two populations, and get some interesting perspectives on, where are the disconnects between photographers and photo editors. So yeah, this data set is really a bitchin' data set. It is, it's pretty great. It's and we really want to kind of do some more work on this.
Yeah. There was another really big thing that we found in this report that hopefully you all notice when you're reading it, is that a lot of photographers are willing to accept a high level of risk for this job, which we found, was true, especially during COVID. Photographers have to put their bodies physically on the line, right? You can be a reporter who writes, and you can call people and email people, and you don't have to be in the fray of danger or action to get to write your story. But to be a photographer means that you do have to really be physically present, and so you're in the same kind of physical or health danger as the people that you're documenting. And so there was a lot of risk that people experience on a day-to-day basis, and I think an important finding from this is that while people are willing to take those risks, they don't feel prepared and well trained in safety precautions and health precautions. And I think that was really made clear for people who were working during COVID and realizing, I don't actually know how to keep myself safe while I'm doing this job. I was assigned to do, I was working on this one story for Wall Street Journal in June, I think, of May 2020. And I had two separate 1.5 hour training sessions with the Wall Street Journal's global security and safety team, where they taught me all of this stuff about COVID health precautions that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise. I'm a freelancer, I'm not working with an institution. So it's only because I was freelancing for this very big institution that had instituted that kind of training for all of their freelancers who were going into high risk areas that I had access to that. I was working for the New York Times and NPR and all these other organizations at the same time, and they didn't give me that training, right? So, there's different levels of access to safety training and information, and it's really important for emerging photographers, student journalists, anyone who's working in spaces where they have to, that they're experiencing risk, to have access to that knowledge and to know how to keep yourself safe on the job. Do y'all have any other thoughts or questions, things that you noticed in the report that stood out to you, or that you had, follow-up thoughts on?
We've mentioned a lot of things today, and I know students listen to a lot of this and they kind of think, how do I fit into this? Where is this? Where does this leave me? And the day after I walk across the stage, pick up my diploma, and get the whole rest of my life. What are your responses? What do you think? What are you feeling right now? Yes. Oh, did you hear that?
No, what did they say?
You can say it louder.
I said pessimism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the danger of stuff like this, is it's seems really shitty, but Honestly, every
Oh,
single job. That's also why I kind of tried to end on like that fact that photographers are still overwhelmingly happy, reporting being happy with the job, because every job sucks a little bit, and some jobs suck a lot. So it's actually like kind of amazing to have a job like this, like being a photographer, where it's creative, it's impactful. You get to communicate with lots of different people and meet so many different people, have all these different experiences. It's not going to be perfect, but wherever there's an issue, there's an opportunity to address it. And so things like this, where we call attention to all of these issues, even though it might feel at the outset like, kind of crappy because you're just pointing out all the problems, what it is an opportunity to address those problems. As long as we don't know that they're happening or we refuse to talk about them, they're just going to persist. But now we have the chance to put it out in the open and to say, okay, well, let's address this. There's this issue about risk and people don't have training. That's actually not hard to address. Let's institute training for all freelancers. Let's institute training modules for all student journalists. That's actually something I'm working on right now. I'm trying to pitch this as a project to the Reynolds Journalism Institute and see if it's, and I'm also working with the International Women's Media Foundation. We're creating this program for trauma-informed safety trainings for journalists that is inclusive of student journalists and freelancers. So as soon as you see a problem, you can address it. And that's a really great thing about data like this.
and this isn't done very often. Tara and I connected really quickly because as researchers, because we are both passionately motivated to helping the profession. We're in it for 110%, and we don't mind, especially Tara, doesn't mind bringing up an uncomfortable truth.
Indeed, it is my
and,
superpower.
Yep. So we like that's and there's utility to that. There's it's still, there's always trade-offs, and this is still, just an amazing, affirming, wonderful way to earn a living, being behind the camera, photographic storytelling. It's everybody, we both know a lot of people who are putting up with a lot of crap, but they still get to tell these amazing stories. And that's powerful. That's important work. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Tara's got a kind of a hell week, so we're not going to keep you on longer than necessary. You sound better though.
Really, I still sound like a frog to myself, but I'm glad to hear that. It's hard to know actually, because I'm just always talking through my headphones. I don't know what reality sounds like.
Are there any other questions before we adjourn? Maybe we can. We have this. I told you about Shoot for Good Muncie. We have a 24-hour volunteer documentary project for volunteerism, and these are the people
Cool.
making it happen. So,
remind me again which class this is. Like, what's the name of this class?
this is advanced photographic storytelling, and it's
awesome.
one of those classes that I was asked to turn two into one. So. A lot of people here in kind of a missions and careers in visual storytelling path, and a few people in here are doing long form projects.
Awesome.
But you and this material kind of speaks to both. So,
well, I would love to leave you all with one last thought, and that's, if you read things like this report or other statistics or information about visual storytelling, and you don't like what you hear, if you're like that sounds awful, or I'm concerned about going into an industry that's like that, instead of feeling like it's not a place for you, think about how you can be the change that you want to see there. I think that a lot of times professions, systems, spaces, they stay the same for years and years because the people who know it should change don't take action and they just leave. But there's always an opportunity for us to work together toward a solution. Knowledge is power. So all of this kind of information, recognizing that things aren't perfect. It's just a space for us to, get in where we fit in and make it look the way that we think it should. So I can't wait to see you all, your names and in the bylines all over the global media, and to see how you affect change in the industry and make it look like it should.
Tara may be handling your work as a photo editor, so keep in touch.
Indeed.
And also I just throw out one other thing. There's Women Photograph, there's Diversity, Diversify Photo, there's Catchlight. There's a lot of
Authority Collective.
Authority Collective, yes. A lot of organizations out there that you can work within and bring about change. So please think hard about that. Okay. Talk to you
Also,
later.
if anyone has any
Yeah.
follow-up thoughts or questions, please feel free to give them my email. I'd love to hear from you all. I'm always down to meet with and talk to students. So thank you for having me again.
You're the best. Did you, I didn't see the little quick question about NCA. Was that submitted, or did we get to that?
No, because
Okay,
I was waiting on the copy edited version, but we can
Oh
talk
yeah,
about it.
I didn't see your I didn't see your email and link until today. I'll try for a EGAMC.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Let's do that.
there's no word limits on that.
Love it.
So-
Awesome.
Okay,
Sounds
right.
good.
Awesome.
Okay,
You know,
thanks, Martin.
deadline.
Take care.
See you later. Bye-bye.